In the last episode, we talked about the joint military exercises conducted by the US, Philippines, Canada, and Australia in the South China Sea on August 7, 2024. However, things didn't go as planned, and the whole thing ended up being an embarrassment. I won't repeat the details here. After that episode aired, I received many messages from fans, including international fans, saying, "It seems like you're no longer just telling stories. You've practically turned into a stand-up comedian. How can you make something so funny? Are you making this stuff up?" A lot of people were concerned about this. But actually, this is easy to verify. Just go online and search for the event's time, location, and details on the ships and planes that participated. You can even find out the specific models of the ships and their hull numbers. With a quick search on Baidu, you can even get information on when these ships were built and when they're due to be decommissioned. It's all crystal clear. All I did was artistically interpret and comment on the ships that participated in the exercises. It's just a bunch of junk they sent to the South China Sea for military exercises. How could it not be embarrassing? Some fans don't understand. They say, "We looked into it, and it's just as you said." But why? Why are they holding joint military exercises in the South China Sea if they don't even have the capability? What's going on in their heads? Well, let me explain. You have to understand the current state of the world's navies. There are over 190 countries on this planet, but not all of them have navies. A navy is a money pit. If you don't have the funds, you can't build one. I'm talking about navies with actual warships. If we're talking about small countries with 2 fishing boats and a couple of kayaks, and they still have the audacity to call their leaders admirals, that's outside the scope of our discussion. There are less than 20 countries in the world that have modern navies. And at least half of those are still using second-hand warships from the US and the Soviet Union from the last century. Only 2 countries, China and the US, have the capability to build new warships. Russia doesn't count anymore, because after the Russia-Ukraine war, they basically lost the ability to build new ships. Some might say, wait, that's not right. South Korea can build its own ships, and so can Japan, the UK, and France. But to those people, I say, look at their ships. Can they fully domestically produce everything, from the radar systems to the gas turbines, anti-submarine missiles, and electrical systems? At the very least, South Korea is using American radars and gas turbines, right? The UK's anti-ship missiles are also American-made, right? France is a bit better, but even they don't have complete domestic production capability. As for Japan, let's not even mention them. Sure, they can build ships, I won't deny that, but when it comes to warships, they can't even touch them without the permission of the US. So this is the current situation on our planet. Around the early 2000s, there were no respectable navies besides the US. That's why back then, the US decided to develop its next-generation warship, the Zumwalt. The Zumwalt was a product of the time. It was designed when there was no longer any need for naval warfare. The US gave up on long-range naval combat capabilities and instead focused on improving shore bombardment capabilities. Its futuristic appearance gives the illusion of strength, but in reality, the Zumwalt's main function was to sail close to enemy shores and launch long-range land attack missiles or guided artillery shells to intimidate other countries. That was the concept behind the Zumwalt. But after 2010, the Chinese Navy rose rapidly. Suddenly, the world had a country capable of engaging in modern naval warfare. The Zumwalt became obsolete because it would never even have the chance to approach China's coastal waters. With the Zumwalt's failure, the US lost an entire generation of shipbuilding progress, which is why the US still relies on its Arleigh Burke-class destroyers warships from the 1990s. So, in the last episode, when I talked about the 4-country joint military exercises and made it sound lighthearted and funny, it was because of the powerful Chinese Navy behind us. That's why we can treat their military exercises as a joke. Without a strong Chinese Navy, that exercise could have been a disaster for China, or at least a disaster for Chinese fishermen. If they came to the South China Sea for military exercises and we couldn't counter it, what could we do? We'd have no choice but to pretend not to see it. Our fishermen have to go out to sea to catch fish. They have loans to pay off on their boats. If they don't work for even a day, they won't be able to make a living. But if someone is holding military exercises for half a month, do you think the fishermen would dare to go out? They'd all be detained. So, It's not that their exercises are inherently funny, it's that we're strong. That's how the world works. When you're strong, wealthy, and capable, everyone else looks like a joke, and you can laugh at it all. But when you're weak, struggling to get by, and can't even feed yourself, everyone else becomes something to fear. This is the reality of the world. If you're not strong, if your defense isn't strong, even the average citizen can't sleep well at night. But when you're powerful, when you have weapons like the YJ-21 and YJ-6 that can strike down any invader at the push of a button, then you can turn their military exercises into a story to entertain the masses. Let's continue from where we left off last time. Previously, we talked about the joint military exercise between the US, the Philippines, Canada, and Australia on August 7th. The US spent $500 million on organizing the exercise, but in the end, it went down the drain and the US was furious. The very next day, they went to the Philippines to ask for money. Now, the Philippine president, Marcos Jr., came up with a sneaky plan to avoid repaying. He proposed ramming China's Coast Guard ship and additionally demanded a $500 million labor fee. The US thought about it and agreed, but after doing the math, it would cost $1 billion in total. Ramming a Coast Guard ship for $1 billion was way too expensive. So, the US set a condition: you can ram the Chinese Coast Guard ship, but you must sink it. Just bumping into it won't count, it has to be a full-on collision. Marcos Jr. agreed, reasoning that with such a large amount of money on the line, the action had to be impactful. He said, "Don't worry, boss, I'll make sure to prepare and target the ships that can be sunk. You don't want to accidentally hit the Haijing 2901 or Haijing 3901, as both have a displacement of 12,000 tons, the largest Coast Guard ships in the world. Even if we smash our heads into them, we wouldn't be able to sink them. So, prior reconnaissance is important. We need to find a softer target. Let's see if there are any smaller Coast Guard ships near China's Huangyan Island, easier to bully. Once we capsize one of those, the effect will be significant." The US thought this was reasonable and went ahead with the plan. On the following day, August 8th, the Philippines dispatched an NC-1 to light transport aircraft to conduct reconnaissance over the Huangyan Island in the South China Sea. Now, you might wonder, why did the Philippines send a transport aircraft for reconnaissance instead of a reconnaissance plane? Well, it's simple. They don't have reconnaissance planes. Many people assume that what we have, other countries must also have, but that's not the case. We are a superpower, but how many superpowers are there in the world? What may seem ordinary to us might be an unattainable luxury for other countries. It's like when we order a plate of beef in a hot pot, so easy for us, just another dish. But try that in South Korea, and they'd be shocked. You dare eat beef? And you even toss it directly into the hot pot, barely cooked before eating it. How wasteful. Similarly, in the summer, we slice a watermelon in half, and each person scoops out a half with a spoon. If someone from Japan saw this, they'd be stunned. That's a watermelon. How could you eat it like that? No ceremony at all. So, we can't really compare ourselves to others, it's just not fair. That's why on August 8th, it made perfect sense for them to send a light transport aircraft for reconnaissance. But, using a small transport plane for reconnaissance comes with a lot of drawbacks. First, it's slow. It's a transport plane, after all, with a turboprop engine. Second, it's large and easy to detect on radar from a distance. Third, its reconnaissance capabilities are limited, mostly relying on the naked eye or maybe a high-definition camera. Anyway, it was all they had. As soon as the transport aircraft reached the airspace over Huangyan Island, we naturally spotted it. Our radar station in Sancha City detected a big, slow-moving object. Hey, there's a fat transport plane coming our way, wobbling as it flies. Is it delivering supplies to the BRP Sierra Madre? But from its flight path, it was clear that it wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. So, we decided to send two J-11B fighter jets to chase it off. Now, when it comes to the J-11B, some people think it's just a Chinese version of the Su-27, but let me explain. The J-11B is not the same thing, even though they look similar. The internal structure of the J-11B has been upgraded, making it stronger and lighter. The most important improvements are in the avionics and fire control systems, which are leaps ahead. In terms of combat power, The J11B is comparable to the F-15E. I choose my words carefully. It's close to, but not quite at, the level of the F-15E. Still, that's pretty impressive. So, the J11Bs were dispatched to intercept a light transport plane. Admittedly, it was overkill, but you don't waste a live training opportunity, right? It's great practice, so the TJ-11BS hit the throttle and flew up to meet the target. The pilots had a bit of a dilemma, though. The transport plane was flying so slowly, they had to throttle back to avoid overshooting it. Eventually, they decided to hail it on the radio. "Hey, Philippines, are you lost? Check your GPS, you're over Huangyan Island, our territory. Get out of here." But the transport plane pretended not to hear and kept flying in circles. Our pilots were getting frustrated. "I've already warned you, and you're still ignoring me. Do you want to get shot down?" They issued several more warnings, but the plane continued to ignore them. At this point, our pilots were losing patience and gave an ultimatum. "If you don't leave now, we'll take action." Still no response. The J11B pilots were furious. "This is disrespectful. We've been warning you, and you're acting like we don't exist." So, one of the pilots decided to get serious. He hit the afterburner, broke the sound barrier with a loud boom, made a sharp turn, and positioned the jet right in front of the transport plane. Then, he deployed a trail of flares, lighting up the sky behind him. Some might ask, why do planes carry flares? Well, flares are a defensive measure used to throw off heat-seeking missiles. In a combat situation, if a fighter jet is locked onto by an infrared-guided missile, the pilot can release flares to mislead the missile. Similarly, jets can release chaff to confuse radar-guided missiles. These are standard defensive measures for fighter jets. However, in a non-combat situation, like this one, releasing flares is a way of sending a strong warning. You'd better leave now. Imagine you're driving down the highway at 120 kilometers per hour, and a truck in front of you starts throwing bricks at your windshield. That's how terrifying it must have been for the Philippine transport plane. The flares were burning at over 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt metal. The transport plane pilot must have panicked and immediately turned around to flee, but even in retreat, the pilot remained silent, not uttering a word. Our J11B pilots couldn't help but feel a bit of respect for the Philippine pilot's courage. Even after we scared the daylights out of him, he didn't say a word, not even to curse us. But the reality was, the Philippine pilot was crying inside as he fled. I told them this plane was no good. The radio has been broken for half a year, and no one bothered to fix it. We must have been warned, but we couldn't hear it. Now we almost got killed because of it. So, after the transport aircraft returned, they lodged a complaint, but the Philippine military was equally furious, feeling greatly insulted. However, there was nothing they could do other than protest, and China, as usual, ignored them. This incident, although minor, gave the Philippine president, Bongbong Marcos, exactly what he wanted. Despite the transport plane being in distress, their surveillance cameras captured a Chinese patrol boat near Scarborough Shoal, hull number 21,551, with an estimated displacement of 300 tons, 55 meters long, and 7.6 meters wide. Seeing this small boat, Bongbong Marcos had a thought. If their reinforced Parola-class patrol boat rammed into it at full speed, it might just capsize the Chinese patrol boat. And if it capsizes at sea, casualties would be inevitable. Such an incident could cause enough trouble for the U.S. to get involved, and that $500 million from the U.S. would be his. But there was a problem. How could they isolate the Chinese patrol boat 21,551, which weighed 300 tons? If it wasn't alone, their Parola-class patrol boat might not get close enough. Worse, they might be hit with water cannons from the Chinese ships first, which wouldn't be a good situation. As Bongbong Marcos pondered the issue, the Chief of Staff of the Philippine Armed Forces, Romeo Bronner, stepped forward with a plan. "Your Highness," he said, "I have a strategy to make their patrol boat 21,551 go solo." Marcos was intrigued and asked him to elaborate. Bronner continued, "We could use the luring the tiger out of the mountain tactic. Look at the map. Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, and Mischief Reef form a sharp triangle. Scarborough Shoal is far to the north of the other two, while Second Thomas Shoal and Mischief Reef are much closer to each other, only 60 kilometers apart. 25 years ago, we ran aground the Sierra Madre at Second Thomas Shoal, and ever since then, the Chinese have been watching it closely. Any supply deliveries or personnel exchanges have to be approved by the Chinese. But after reviewing the past, we've learned that Second Thomas Shoal is too far from Palawan. So, in April this year, we anchored the 2010 BRP Sierra Madre at Mischief Reef. Unlike last time, we didn't run it aground, just anchored it. If the situation became untenable, we could simply raise anchor and retreat. But the Chinese are clever. After April, they surrounded our 9701 ship, initially allowing food and fresh water but blocking fuel. Now, after a few months, the 9701 is running out of fuel, meaning the ship is effectively trapped. Without fuel, it can't return home. The Chinese have tightened their control even further, restricting food and water deliveries. Our crew aboard the 9701 has now run out of supplies. Romeo then suggested, the best place to ram the Chinese patrol boat is near Mischief Reef. This would serve two purposes. First, we could resupply the 9701 with fuel, allowing it to return home. Second, Mischief Reef is close to Palawan, so we can escape quickly after the ramming. But how do we isolate the 21,551 patrol boat near Mischief Reef? Marcos asked. Romeo grinned, saying, "We'll use the decoy tactic. We'll send our patrol boat, the BRP Gregorio del Pilar to provoke the Chinese at Scarborough Shoal. When their patrol boats gather there, the 21,551 will be left alone near Mischief Reef. And that's when we strike." Romeo continued, "I've already invited journalists from around the world. They'll be on board to capture everything when we ram the Chinese ship. The incident will embarrass China, and the US will be pleased." Marcos agreed and gave the order to proceed. On August 11th, the BRP Gregorio del Pilar a 500-ton patrol boat, entered Chinese waters near Scarborough Shoal. This was a violation of China's territory, and as expected, the Chinese Coast Guard quickly intercepted it. Just as they were preparing to fire water cannons, the Gregorio del Pilar turned around and retreated. The next day, the Gregorio del Pilar returned and repeated the tactic, turning and running every time the water cannons were prepared. This strange behavior caught the attention of the Chinese forces stationed at Scarborough Shoal. They suspected something was off and ordered their larger Coast Guard vessels to gather near Scarborough Shoal, leaving other areas less guarded. On August 17th, Marcos and Romeo saw their plan working. The large Chinese Coast Guard vessels had gathered at Scarborough Shoal, leaving only the patrol boat 21,551 and the Coast Guard ship 3,104, with a displacement of 1,500 tons, near Mischief Reef. With the larger Chinese ships away, the Philippines sent Tuparola-class patrol boats to ram the 21,551. 2 against 1, they were sure the Chinese patrol boat would sink. Marcos was ecstatic, confident that his plan would succeed, and that the US would reward them. On August 18th, the Filipino media boarded the ships to capture the moment. Preparations were made to ram the 21,551 under the cover of night on August 19th. Did the plan succeed? Did they sink the 21,551? We'll find out in the next segment.